And as far as banking is concerned, Bitcoin was never designed to solve the actual problems created by the banking industry, only to be the new medium by which they operated.
This one is pretty questionable, but we'll let the next part play out so that we frame his argument fairly before we break it down into parts.
The principal offering was a revolution, but at best a changing of the guard. The gripe is not with the outcomes of 2008, but the fact that you had to be well connected in order to get in on the grift in 2006. And even the change of the guard is an illusion. Jews. Some of the largest institutional holders of cryptocurrency are the exact same investment banks that created the subprime loan crash. Rather than being a reprieve to the people harmed by the housing bubble, the people whose savings and retirements were unknown to them, being gambled on smoke, cryptocurrency instantly became the new playground for smoke vendors.
Okay, so he starts off saying that a lot of the same players have gotten into crypto, but his understanding of the timeline is a bit skewed. The same people instantly got into Bitcoin? Spoken like somebody who only started paying attention recently. It would seem that way if you got onto the crypto Twitter of today and saw the likes of Peter Thiel and Andreessen Horowitz and Goldman Sachs getting into Bitcoin. Now, when it comes to the individuals he points to here, I don't actually think this is a particularly salient argument the way he makes it here, just because, saying that Tyler Winklevoss is involved seems more like a guilt by association type of argument, as it doesn't necessarily speak to the type of market their presence is cultivating, unless you can point to concrete ways in which their influence is systematically polarizing the market or otherwise distorting the Bitcoin market or the crypto market more generally. Not saying that you couldn't do that, only that he doesn't. I, however, will in a few minutes, so hold tight. That being said, let's go ahead and talk about some of the examples that were given. If you go back only a few years, you'll find that Peter Thiel didn't think Bitcoin was viable as recently as 2014, and today admits to having underinvested in it. And it strikes me as pretty natural for Thiel specifically to get in on Bitcoin or cryptocurrency more generally, as it's marketed as the type of platform that would basically obviate a legacy payment system like PayPal. If a future technology is slated to crush his company, he'd be an idiot not to try and take any opportunity to ride that wave up, which he didn't until the price was already massive. So now we're living in a world where this billionaire is a potential bag holder to entire strata of Bitcoin investors. At this point, 2022, PayPal has actually announced that it's seriously looking into the development and release of a PayPal stablecoin, with the potential next step for their company being a big push into crypto. As for the eugenics and racist stuff, yeah, that's pretty messed up, but not necessarily a part of the spirit of Bitcoin or a central emphasis of the crypto community as a whole. I'm pretty deep into crypto, and this was news to me. Given that Goldman Sachs has within the last year or two gotten in on the action, and Jewish people like, for instance, David Pakman are also into Bitcoin, I think it's fair to say that you can be into cryptocurrency or Bitcoin without hating Jewish bankers. He also talks about old money finance assholes, the Winklevoss twins. And here, he rightly says that they were amongst the earlier names that got into Bitcoin. Reportedly, they got in around April 2013, which would put their initial cost basis somewhere between $50 and $260, which is pretty impressive. Now, I might be wrong about this, but it seems that the relevance of their presence in the Bitcoin market stems from them being old money finance types, which is a bit of a stretch. Their father is a self-made finance tycoon who started off as a professor of insurance at a university and as an actuary who started Winklevoss Consultants and Technologies after the twins were born, during their lifetimes. Yes, Daddy was rich, but this hardly makes them old money finance types. The other argument could be that their connections link them inherently to the corruption of 2008 and 2009, which I also think is unfair. As far as I could find, Winklevoss Technologies don't have much involvement in the financial instrument side of things related to the financial crisis and operate more on the software side of finance, in line with Howard Winklevoss's background in actuarial sciences. While it's fair to suggest that this isn't that far off from the industry in question, and their family probably has connections to the problematic investment banks that were involved, bringing them up here just feels like an emotional appeal to the image built up by Armie Hammer's portrayal of them in the movie The Social Network. I'll put a piece on the Winklevi in the description, and you can decide for yourself. I don't know them well enough, or care enough, to expound on that further here, because once again, I don't think the argument is presented in a way that actually directly links them to any actual wrongdoing in the cryptocurrency market. Once again, you could potentially make that argument, I just don't think he makes that argument. With regard to Jordan Belfort, rightly named a financial criminal here, he didn't really think Bitcoin was viable as recently as 2018, when the price had already reached about $6,000 to $10,000. Jordan Belfort only got crypto magnitude gains at this market cycle, and at the time of the writing of this script, his profits are being dug into pretty good. In fact, he's probably selling to me right now. Once again, though, he's been against crypto longer than he's been for it. Chris Dixon is a bit of an idiot, and frankly, I'm shocked that he's gotten as far in life as he has. With regard to Bitcoin, we don't hold him in particularly high regard. And yes, I mean, he's big into NFTs. And as I said, I don't really disagree with much of Dan's take on NFTs specifically. Now, I do take issue with how he characterizes Coinbase in this particular section, although though this isn't material to the underlying argument here. Coinbase is only the third largest centralized exchange below Binance and FTX, and hardly controls all entries and exits to the crypto economy. But fine, his point is that Chris is a VC connected to the large Web2 companies, and that stands. Now on to the point that
some of the largest institutional holders of cryptocurrency are the exact same investment banks that created the subprime loan crash.
this is currently true. But once again, we have to look at the timelines here, as the true narrative is precisely the opposite of what Dan is trying to get at here. When he says that cryptocurrency instantly became the new playground for these new smoke vendors. The implication is that these entities immediately jumped on the Bitcoin bandwagon because they recognized that this was a new speculative financial instrument that they could use to get rich off of at the expense of common people. In truth, Bitcoin turned 13 this year, and for most of its lifetime so far, it has been reviled by these exact institutions. We forced these banks to start offering crypto services. Indeed, the only reason investment banks started to get in on the action these last few years is because public interest continued to burgeon despite the banks constantly saying on television that it was all a scam. They realized that while they'd missed out on the ground floor, there was enough potential left to at least get in between people and this new asset class by buying large amounts and then essentially gatekeeping it. For them, they are no longer the executioner swinging the axe. They are the sentenced, tipping the executioner to make sure the cut is clean. They put off participation in the crypto market as long as they could because they could see the writing on the wall. And now they might as well ride the wave all the way down. If it goes well, they could maybe even transition into Web3 versions of themselves. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But ultimately, a lot of them aren't going to make the cut. And I think they kind of get that by now. Now, let me add a little something to the mix while we're talking about shady players and how their participation, or in this case, lack thereof, reflect on crypto. Let's take a moment to talk about the IMF and the World Bank. The International Monetary Fund was set up after the Second World War at the Bretton Woods Conference to manage the global regime of exchange rates and international payments. They manage poverty in third world countries by providing short-term loans, and their sister organization, the World Bank, provides longer-term loans for developmental projects. They are lenders of last resort that work together. There are 180 members of the IMF, but the US has 17% of the voting power, significantly more than any other country in there, with the next greatest share being about 6%. They have 16% in the World Bank, with making it the only country with enough power to veto any World Bank decision. On the surface, this all sounds pretty great. Who wouldn't want to help poor countries after all? A full expose of the IMF and World Bank global financial machine is a bit beyond the scope of this video. But let's just say that American imperialism and Western colonialism are alive and well in the modern day. Many of the developing countries that borrowed from these institutions back in the day were run by authoritarian regimes that blatantly pocketed a lot of the money from the loans, which were given anyway as there seemed no other way to deliver nation-level aid to those countries. But of course, when said dictators retire in comfort, their nations are still stuck with the bill, and importantly, the terms that came along with those loans. Policies like fiscal austerity, high interest rates, trade liberalization, privatization, and open capital markets have been counterproductive for some target economies, especially in the poorest countries that have the weakest domestic means of production. On paper, many of these interventions make sense in a general sort of way. You can take an extended look on, free market capitalism, economics, and protectionism in my video in the description. But that kind of ignores the cookie-cutter approach that the IMF has taken and the exploitation of markets by multinational corporations and Western investors that typically follows the aid from the IMF. These countries then become export-oriented markets that end up selling off all of their natural resources, which in a globalized market results in various countries competing with each other to offer the best prices internationally. This would ultimately cause a decline in the prices of said goods, one good example being the Senegalese ground nut market. Short story, a fall in the prices of a poor nation's staple export can result in a worse economic hardship and often the need for further loans, perpetuating a cycle of dependence on Western money and the emergence of a debt trap. Yes, this is a heavily abbreviated version of the problem, but we don't have all day. The IMF and the World Bank routinely keep third world countries and their economies dependent on first world loans, deepening Western hegemony via debt colonialism. If you're going to point to evil on a grand scale, look no further. And these institutions, not people, institutions, they are against crypto. And screw them. So there, I can play that game too. Not that I enjoy doing so, because frankly, the controversy surrounding these institutions is actually much more complicated than I'm letting on here, and I recognize that. I'll put some resources in the description, but while we're playing this game, I figure I may as well throw my own lot in there. By the way, if you're wondering why I haven't yet fulfilled my promise to point out systemic distortions due to the presence of an individual actor, don't worry, we'll get there.